So there's this watch expert called Nico. I don't know if you've heard of him. Compared to him, I'm an absolute noob when it comes to watches. But not long ago, he made a video where he talked about the brands you should absolutely under no circumstances buy.
Never.
I've never done a reaction video, and what better way than to take the watch YouTuber with the most subscribers in the world and see what a watch noob like me has to say about an expert's opinions like Nico's. Now, before we get started, I enjoy Nico. I know that some of my regular viewers think he's a little bit loud. Personally, I find him entertaining, and I also am pretty confident that he knows what he's talking about when it comes to watches. He just doesn't go into in-depth because that's not the focus of his channel. Now, with that said, let's dive in.
Please do me a favor, Jaeger le-Coultre. Go back in your lane. If you're charging £8,100, you need to make sure that everything is top level. I feel you guys raise the prices and reduce your quality control.
Okay, I agree. JLC is massively overpriced. They make really nice watches, but for a whole lot of reasons, they just don't perform as well as you would expect for a brand with a heritage like theirs. He's also referencing quality control and saying that it's bad for the price. Now, he's definitely opened more JLCs than I have. I do know, though, that every single JLC I have ever owned, which I currently have a couple of and my wife has, have all had problems at some point. And in one case, I've actually had multiple problems that just never kind of seem to get fixed. He also seems to indicate that some of the movement work they do is a little bit lazy. I'm not sure if this is like a Panerai situation where the movements were only finished on visible components where everything else was pretty much sand blasted. But if they're cutting corners on a general level, that's a problem at this price point. They are expensive watches, but if you like them, you like them. And I think I'm left with the feeling that I would actually like to know a little bit more about the claims he makes and see specific examples to understand how, it pans out.
You're starting to look like Hublot. Straps, casing, everything. It starts to look so dissimilar to Hublot.
So he's saying essentially that Zenith is turning into Hublot. That's not surprising since they're both owned by LVMH. But I don't agree. Zenith, as I see it, have three lines. They have the watches that are the sort of mainstream, easy on the high, mass consumer products. That's watches, like the Chronomaster Sport, that look essentially just like a Daytona or a Speedy, and they aim at the exact same market. Then they have the Enthusiast line, which is all the A models like the A3, A4, where it's vintage-inspired watches that are aimed at enthusiasts and lovers of all things Zenith of the past. And then finally, they have the third line, which is the Hublot type watches. So the Defy Extremes, which are typically big, bulky, they're colorful, they're sometimes iced out. For me, the point is that they have all three lines, and they seem to be prioritizing all three. So it's not just a Hublot brand. It's more to it than just those big watches.
What are you doing? Your watches are not worth as much as you're saying. You're flooding the market with dog shit. They can buy them for 60% off.
Panerai. Panerai is expensive for what you get. Periscope has some good teardowns of some of the Panerai movements and the corners they cut, but that's not necessarily unique to them. A lot of brands do that. Panerai really aren't cool anymore, and their pricing in some ways does reflect their popularity from 20 years ago. But I'd still get a Luminor or a Radimir. I'd definitely demand a discount, but they're still worth a look. Hopefully my channel is also worth a look. If you're enjoying this video, then it makes sense for you to subscribe. That way you're notified when I release a new video. So if you feel the content warrants it, please subscribe. Thanks.
Bremont.
Davide.
Davide.
Bad day to be Davide.
It's a bad day to be Davide. Davide gets in power and completely changes the brand from the bottom up to the moon. Starts changing the logo, the brand message, and every bit of identity that was connected to Bremont.
Mr. Nico doesn't seem to like Davide Cerato, does he? I agree that Bremont needed a change. Their old brand was not making money. The previous owners spent all their money on a sexy headquarters while tanking the brands. They were not profitable, so something had to happen. The change that happened was drastic, and I think the whole air, sea, and land thing is super bland and super uninspiring. Their new price point is also high considering what you're actually getting, but honestly, the Terra Nova isn't bad as a watch, neither is the Supermarine. It's a nice looking generic black diver that isn't massively different from a Blancpain. It's a little bit overpriced, but the watches are pretty decent.
Brand number 9, Aventi. The fact that I actually named them is already an embarrassment for me.
Don't like those watches, not a brand I've ever seen in the metal, and I'd probably not ever recommend them to anybody.
I love Richard Mille. I think Richard Mille has peaked way too soon.
Richard Mille have peaked too soon and their new stuff isn't that good. From what I understand, Richard Milles aren't commanding the same premiums on the secondary market that they did a couple of years back. I also think there's a valid point to these specialty hype brands and their longevity. Before them, there was Jacquet, and before that, there was probably somebody else. The point being, brands like these do run the risk of falling out of favor. They are so hype dependent that staying relevant becomes increasingly difficult over time. It's also not just a question of hype, it's also because they usually make a name for themselves by leveraging, let's call it non-standard or non-conforming designs. These watches are made to stand out and look different, and I think there's a reasonable argument to be made that they lack staying power. The designs are not particularly timeless. Now, is it a reason in itself to not buy the watch? Well, I mean, if you're buying it because you want to be, one of the cool kids, then maybe Nico has a point.
Watch brand number 7, Franck Muller. The brand is dead, not the man. The man is a rock and roller, right?
So basically, in Nico's mind, Franck Muller is dead, so don't buy the new stuff. He's telling the same story as Richard Mille, but just more dead. Honestly, the watches from this brand have never ever spoken to me at all. I can't think of a single one I would want to own. Are they uncool today? Yes. Was the coolness part of their appeal? Yes.
Downfall of Franck Muller is completely different. Downfall of Franck Muller has got to do with quality control using allegedly foreign movements and foreign parts, and Franck Muller being an absolute lunatic himself.
Nico also adds that this is a brand that's gone from making complex watches to sourcing bad parts. At this price, that's a no-go. It boils down to a mix of the brand not being cool and the components not being up to standard for the price. At this price, if that holds true, and Nico's seen a lot more of these watches than I have, then I'm with him on this.
For sure. I think it's right. Nothing personal. I always liked Studio Underdog. It's got nothing to do with luxury watches, by the way. It's just fashion watches, but I find it cringy as and for some unknown reason, it's now becoming a cult.
Overpriced fashion watches. Well, not entirely incorrect. I mean, they get a stock movement from China for the most part. They get the cases sourced from somewhere, and the dials and hands are sourced from somewhere else, and then they assemble everything in the UK. He's not wrong, but he's also not completely right. At this price point, everybody's sourcing most of the components for the watch, and most of the work is in the design phase and the assembly phase. Does that make it a fashion watch? That's for you to decide. To some extent, though, I do feel that lumping this kind of watch into the same category as Daniel Wellington is unfair. But it's a relevant question to ask if, throwing in a stock Chinese mechanical movement today makes it not a fashion watch, or is the defining characteristic of a fashion watch that real watch enthusiasts wouldn't buy them? And if that's the case, then it's definitely not a fashion watch, because a lot of watch enthusiasts are buying this watch.
They're cool watches for 300 quid, but not starting at 500-600 quid, man.
Studio Underdog watches are a little bit expensive for what they are. Sort of agree, but that applies to the Moon Swatch from Swatch as well. We can go back and forth about profit and how much profit it's reasonable for a brand to make on a watch. A lot of the Studio Underdogs cost between $600 and $650. They have a Seagull movement just like the Seagull chronograph that costs also somewhere between $600 and $650. So that's basically the same for a watch that comes directly from China. So it's not like it's super, super different.
I was actually surprised I was looking on their website. They're trying to launch a watch for £1,700. Are you absolutely out of your mind?
They're getting expensive what they are. And for me, I agree that the value prop was at the original $500, $600 level and not at $1,500. I probably wouldn't buy their most expensive offerings. The $1,700 watch Nico references is the one with an SW510 Elaboré grade movement now. Is that expensive? Not really. Farah sells the exact same movement with one of their watches for $1,995. Same movement. I think it's got 50 meters more depth rating, but basically the same movement and same kind of watch. Hanhart sells a dual pusher version of the 510. I don't know if that's the Elaboré grade movement. I think it is. Let's just assume it is. But basically, there are a lot of watches from a lot of other brands that are selling a watch with comparable technical specs, at least, for ballpark somewhere between $1,500 and $2,000. That's the same as Studio Underdog. They're not markedly higher than all those other brands. Now, Studio Underdog doesn't have any credentials yet in terms of watchmaking like Steinhart has. This is just an assembly job, but the price is kind of in line with what others are selling very similar models for.
Very short, if you buy a new Roger Dubuis in the shop, you have significant problems.
Okay, so the argument is don't buy them because they have bad value retention. If that's important to you, then absolutely. If not, and you like them, I don't see why you should care. They're not personally my taste, but you guys should know that I don't believe that value retention should necessarily be a factor when buying a watch. In theory, when I buy a watch, at least I'm going to own it forever, so what does it matter what I could sell it for? And the same goes for Jacquet. I don't care about them personally, but value retention is not necessarily that important to all people, so you should only listen to this advice to the extent that value retention is important to you. And if it is, buy it secondhand or on the grey market, and then you're fine.
Blancpain today is dead. Dead. Done. Walk into a Blancpain boutique. You do not want to buy a watch there. You want to walk out. This is shit. There's no identity in that brand anymore. It's gone. It's poof.
Yeah, no, don't agree. Swatch haven't been great at managing their high-end brands, but the Bathyscaphe and the 50 Fathoms are still really nice watches. Is it worth going secondary to get a discount? Absolutely, but I wouldn't rule them out offhand or immediately. Even at full price, they're still watches that you're going to enjoy wearing that are really, really well made. Now, as to his point about them not having identity, to a certain extent, I agree. His point about them being mismanaged by Swatch, I agree, but the watches are still good watches. It does call into question what the importance of identity is to you. It's like the people that will only go to a restaurant because it's the cool new place. There's a good, place down the road, but because it's not cool anymore, these people won't eat there. I mean, fine, you don't want to go there because it's not cool, but the food is still good.
Called homages, one brand in particular, Steinhart. I'm not going to go in detail, don't ever buy a Steinhart, not even new pre-owned nor anything else.
He doesn't really get specific as to why you shouldn't buy a Steinhart. Is it because it's an homage or is it because they're bad homages? He doesn't really specify. Now, you know my opinion, I've got no problem with homages. I just don't want people to put Rolex on the dial. Now, as for quality, it's been a while since I've handled a Steinhart, but I would definitely say that there are quite a few Chinese factory brands that make really high quality homages these days. St. Martin, Eddie's Dive, Kronos, Kraken, Kronos, they all do a pretty decent job. Now, Nico wants people to buy the real thing. Ideally, I would prefer you to do that as well, or buy a Citizen or a Seiko, but I'm not going to judge you if you choose to buy a clone or an homage, as long as it's not a fake.
Something that absolutely breaks my heart to do, number one, is, unfortunately, the most important watch brand in the entire world. The reason why we have certain complications today, including the Tourbillon, one of the oldest watch brands in the world. But Jesus Christ, don't buy them new. Don't buy past glory. And Breguet, unfortunately, is past glory.
I did a video on Breguet. I agree that Breguet are probably not in a good state. Nico wants a new direction for them, and I think they need more or less the same direction, but need to be much smaller and much more premium. So more handmade, more attention to detail, more exclusive. I don't think an AP direction is right for them. He's totally right about the drop in pricing. Don't buy anything at retail. You can easily save 50% on most models. So absolutely agree, don't buy new. That was fun. I'm a little bit afraid that Nico will do a video about me and he'll call me boring and dull and an old fart and a whole lot of other bad things. I hope not. I just wanted to do something fun, to think on how I reacted to his thinking and his logic. I think I've been nice to him. Hopefully he'll be nice to me. As for you guys, let me know, where do you agree with mine and where do you agree with Nico's takes on these brands? Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe. Cheers.